Hi everyone, Grant Wilson, Executive Chair of Tivan Limited. It's now 9 o'clock in Darwin on the 12th of April, and I'm re-recording a session that we did about 4 hours ago live. We had some AV issues. Meantime, I've been at the Darwin Dialogue with the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, Japanese Ambassador, various other luminaries in what's going to be a very exciting couple of days where critical minerals are on the agenda for very good reasons because the world's changing and we're going to be part of that change. I wanted to re-record the session because we're perfectionistic here now, and I wanted to make sure that the session is there for posterity reasons because a lot of people will watch this down the track, and I want them to appreciate the journey the company's been on firsthand and at high quality res for the next 45 minutes, we'll say, to convey the change and to convey, most importantly, the forward-facing mission that the company's now got. That's the team, that's the board, that's stakeholders, that's various other A-list counterparties that are joining us so rapidly. And that paints a very exciting and differentiated future. Tivan cannot and should not be compared to other listed companies in this space anymore. Just as TNG shouldn't have been compared to other credible companies last year, this company is now on a radically different trajectory. And we're really excited about what's been achieved in the past 4 months and what's going to be achieved through the balance of the year and beyond. And so I want to talk through that narrative, mindful that the audience that we're now talking to extends well beyond existing shareholders, extends well beyond the confines of Australia as well, and ultimately moves into an institutional space. And that goes for partners, counterparties, shareholders, governments, and so forth. So I wanted to just re-record this to ensure that all the work that's been done, including in terms of the presentational quality, is A-list, because that's what we are now. And I want to make sure that message gets right across. So off we go. The first point I made in the call earlier was that as part of the change, we're really infusing the company now with a sense of purpose. A lot of mining companies and resource companies in Australia are really designed to dig and ship, to extract, and they don't have a broader mission. And this is partly because the overriding objective of these companies is obviously to make profit, shareholder returns, and so on and so forth. But we weren't really trying to confront real challenges, which we are now geopolitically and beyond. And as we've redefined the mission of Tivan, it's become clear that we can play a really integral part in this journey in Australia in the next couple of years and decades if we get all of this right. And that's become abundantly clear following the acquisition of Speewah, and then ultimately onwards with the announcement that we made earlier today that effectively we've tied up in a really unique arrangement with Cyro, and that will provide us with an accelerated facilitation path, as well as really important reshoring of intellectual capital and an ability to differentiate the company now and into the years ahead. So we're starting here with a rather grandiose mission statement, but this will become part of the marketing that will drive the company forward in the years ahead. This circularity concept, circularity is really important. It's going to become the new sustainability, and we're highly differentiated in terms of what we've got now and the opportunities ahead, because effectively we can create a whole value chain in Australia and also in the process define value propositions which are not existent in any other critical minerals company in the nation, and start to address the hardest problem the country's got, which is a path to net zero, which is legislated, but which does not have a credible strategy. And we can be right part of that now. And that's going to give the company enormous political leverage and enormous leverage when we come to raise money. The money that you need to build a project of this significance, and the money that cannot be raised by most of the competitors in this sector. Most of the vanadium companies that I've now looked at in Australia will never make it to project readiness. They will never raise the money. What we're doing here is putting in foundational steps and values and principles that will ultimately drive shareholder returns in the next couple of years and the next couple of decades, I expect. The vision is that strong, and the foundations now are that strong that we believe this can be an enduring company, and a company which is uniquely different in the political landscape and in the market landscape in Australia. So it's really quite exciting what we've achieved. And the circularity concept here, it's partly branding, but it's an image I think that will start to resonate through media, social media, and beyond as we get going. But the core of it is that Australia ultimately has a great renewable resource, whether it's wind or solar, but a grid that's designed without storage, because currently we're transmitting electricity effectively from coal and oil and gas straight to the end user. And so we need a big battery system to support the net zero emissions strategy. And we don't have one. And we need to build it preferably with as much onshore capability as possible. And I'll come to what that means versus other available solutions deeper into the presentation. But what we're doing with Tivan now is putting the company right in the middle of that debate. And that, as I said, will give us enormous leverage, the sorts of leverage that is required to build a project of this significance. Okay, so onward. The change was dramatic, it was significant, and ultimately it's captured in this slide. I won't dwell here because this slide has been in the public domain for a couple of weeks, but the shift today was very significant. Basically, we've opened up the last part of the Venn diagram, the technology, to change as well. And that reflects the very open-minded approach that the change campaign brought to the company that we found. That was Dr. Robinson and myself. And it was also informed by Simon Morton, the director who's still with us, and who provided that really important transition between the old era and the new era, informed by his knowledge and experience and expertise. When we walked in, we knew we had really significant problems, and those crystallized in the first couple of weeks once we got to know the team and once we got into the project definition that had been held out to market. And we'd worked really hard, as everyone knows now, to not just identify the problems, but to find solutions and then to execute them in really, really rapid time. And we've achieved that. We've moved the processing plant to Darwin, the Middle Arm Sustainable Development Precinct, which is the most important industrial precinct in the country by far. We now own the most important and largest and most strategic vanadium resource on the planet. We've moved aggressively in terms of sustainability through community outreach, but also tying up with Sun Cable, which is the largest solar project and most advanced solar project of that scale in the world. And we've harnessed the tailwinds that are available both in terms of government locally and increasingly internationally as well. So all of those things were known, and what we left alone until today publicly was the technology. That's Tivan. Tivan is not a sacred cow. We walked in with a very, very open mind about the complexity of the technology. And once we saw the difficulties that previous management were facing in terms of commercializing it, there was a recognition that if an alternative path or a better path was available, it should definitely be pursued, investigated. And ultimately, again, if we can find a solution to that, as we've done today, announced today, then of course we should go for that. And so that was the mindset that I brought in: identify problems, get lateral if you can in terms of defining solutions, and then execute. And that's what the company's been doing in lockstep with the team that's been really animated and focused on turning this company around from where we found it and defining a new mission, and great enthusiasm and talent and sort of zest now in the team to push forward, which is great. And so that's been the journey in really simplistic terms. And I'm just going to push through to provide more detail, especially for new investors who are not familiar with the story so much. This is the first 120 days now. It's 4 months, and you can see a series of high impact, high velocity activities led by myself as executive chair, but supported in full by the board. We've been meeting once a week pretty much as a board. So it's been a hyperactive board, providing that governance and structure, which enables the executive team to move as fast as we needed to do to salvage the company, and then ultimately to redefine and now be able to push down a pathway which is really different than what we found and genuinely exciting. And so you'll see the 4 findings: orchestrated, executed, communicated precisely. Bringing in transparent, timely communications was clearly a priority for shareholders, and that's certainly been achieved. The 4 big ones are in gold, and obviously Sun Cable announcements there. Some of the other important announcements include the big submission that we wrote to the Critical Minerals Office in Canberra back at the start of February. It's a 10,000-word document. It's linked below, highly recommended. It's done the rounds in Canberra extensively. It's influencing government policy. It'll influence our ability to get government funding. And it's ultimately defined the strategic conception of the new company as well. So that's a must read. There's a few other documents that are out there now in the public domain that I've authored, which are really important for people who want to come on this journey with us. And you'll see a bunch of smaller announcements there, which go to good governance and ultimately addressing the mess that we found. And we had to do that mainly in the month of December and early January. But since mid-January, it's just been very much forward focused. And I do want to encourage everyone to stay with that forward focused philosophy as we move forward. Okay, the corporate scorecard. This will not surprise people that have been with the company for a long time. It will shock people that are new to the company and the new investors that will be coming in. And so this is an assessment between Jason Gilte, who's our CFO, who was part of the old era towards the end, and myself as executive chair coming in and looking with really clear eyes at the company as if it were any sort of company. It doesn't matter if it's a resource company or a hedge fund or a widget company or an auto company. You've got to have a company that's functioning down different channels and categories. And this is our fair dinkum assessment of what we found and how fast we've turned things around. And if you project that rate of change forward, you're obviously going to have a company which is highly efficient, highly productive, very much differentiated from what I've seen now in the junior mining sector in Australia, which is dysfunction. And it will ultimately provide pathways which encourage A-list counterparty stakeholders, government to engage, because we are now really excelling in some categories off an incredibly low base. And also those other categories which have been defined, which will be slower moving, have workflows and priorities and resourcing to come. And so without a functioning company, obviously not going to achieve anything. And to achieve what we want to achieve, you're going to have a very high functioning company, which is part of what we've done already. So I won't go through all the categories, but just to emphasize governance is a key priority. We've still got to change a few of the government's policies to bring it into best practice. There's some other items in that sleeve, but obviously a dramatic improvement. You can run through commercial partners. You can run through the work that we've done with government. The digital transformation's taking shape. Second version of the website will be ready. These are all softer deliverables, but they're very, very important to the lifeblood of the company. And it's part of what we've been focused on whilst we've been doing the broader deal flow. Okay, so just the findings. I'm not going to dwell on these so much because they're already part of the narrative and they've been publicized. And I want to try to keep these comments really focused now, given it's pretty late. And so the first finding was coming back to Darwin, and that was obviously, it was relatively premeditated. It was my expectation before I joined from the outside that this would be necessary. And it's to access the large common use infrastructure that it's available at Middle Arm to ensure they're operating in close proximity with government. The government in the Northern Territory is very agile. There's a lot of business acumen, and they're very keen to see things take shape. So here we're a big fish. We are a very big fish now. And you can see that with the impact of the decisions, the media that's taking place around the company. And we have a real capability now to shape aspects of the common use infrastructure, which will help project facilitation and ultimately infrastructure, which is not available in Central Australia or in the Kimberley for that matter, which is why the Tivan processing facility needs to be located in Darwin. The tie-up in some cable was part of that. For people that have looked at that closely, you'll see it's been defined as 200 to 300 megawatts. That's an enormous amount of energy. Absolutely enormous. It's equivalent basically to the whole city of Darwin, which is the sorts of scale that we're now contemplating, because economies of scale will ultimately give us leverage, pricing power, and many other efficiencies and a higher IRR as well. So it's not to say we'll use all of that, but that is to say that that's the conception of the letter of intent with Sun Cable. And there's various other reasons we had to be in Darwin, and we're firmly here now. Second finding was Speewah. I won't dwell on this, but the company now owns the most strategically important vanadium resource in the world. Vanadium is a critical mineral and can be highly differentiated in the right hands with a downstream technology in terms of vanadium redox flow batteries, which can have a great use case in Australia and beyond. The hold up in that sector, as I'll talk about in a minute, has been the lack of Western secure supply of vanadium at a stable market price in scale. And again, and it's not to denigrate in any way the other vanadium projects in Australia, but for this sector to really be inspired and to be relevant to grid storage in Australia and globally, it's going to take something like we're proposing to blow it wide open and ultimately to provide the sorts of scale and pathways for even more scale for vanadium as a commodity to be relevant, and then to be financialized, and then to inspire an R&D cycle, which will promote the cost to storage ratio of vanadium batteries and will ultimately lead to industrial scale deployment. You need to be thinking big for this all to come together. And we now have the resource to facilitate that. And we have the infrastructure to facilitate that in Darwin as well. So it's really important. Without that acquisition, it would have been lights out for this company. There should be no illusions about that. With this acquisition, it really did change everything. And we're delighted as well to now call KRR a major shareholder of Tivan. Really grateful to Tony Barden. I said this before. It was a fascinating deal that we did under some real time pressure, and it required good faith on both sides throughout that period in February to get the deal done. It's a win-win for both companies, and we're really pleased to welcome KRR to the registry. The third big decision was to stay in Central Australia. We need to for project facilitation reasons, and also to ensure that the company's social license to operate right through the territory remains intact. Mount Peak is still a strategically important resource for the company, and it may well end up as our second project if we maintain the pathway and indeed broaden it out. It's a logical second one because we own it, but it does have deficiencies. You know, the distance from port is a real issue. The lower vanadium grade is a real issue. And so with Sandover, what we're communicating to the government, to stakeholders down through Central Australia is that we're still there, that Tivan has a footprint, that we're working constructively with First Nations, CLC, on country, and it's absolutely necessary for the sorts of political leverage that's required for this company, that we're there, that our brand's there. And Sandover was an elegant way to clean up a very difficult problem that I was left with and turn it again into a solution. We're working with Earth AI. It's run by Roman. He's a guy I've worked with before. I trust him. He's a really, really brilliant man. He's designed really progressive digital technologies for low impact exploration. Really delighted to partner with him. I trust his presence in Central Australia. And for those that don't know, I did go to primary school there. It's a spiritual home of mine. And so I'm highly cognizant of who might represent the company in that part of Australia. And Roman, I feel very comfortable with. In fact, I'm really looking forward to seeing his technology deployed in this way, and with great support actually of Central Land Council as well. I was in Alice last week for 4 days and had to tell them some hard truths, and that was very difficult and upsetting for everyone that was there. But that's where we are, and it was important in those sessions that I could say, listen, we're still here, we're doing Sandover, and we've got a path, and that Mount Peak may well come back into play on a feasible time horizon as well. So that's Sandover. And fourth was the big announcement today that there's a technology pathway, which we believe offers the company now a real path to commercialization. The technology pathway is being branded as Tivan Plus. So it's an evolution. It looks like it'll ultimately move as in the direction of a hybridization of all the work that we've done with Tivan, and with a flow sheet that Cyro has been working on for a couple of years now, and which they've proven up at Mount Peak specifically. We did a very extensive workshop with their team and our team about 6 weeks ago, went through everything. And it was a fascinating session. It was really, really inspiring to see people working together for the silos that exist in this country between research and industry to be broken down in the way that we've achieved that. And that culminated in an announcement today. There's limitations on what I can say about the agreement that now exists between Tivan and Cyro, but I can say it's unique, and I don't think it's been achieved before. Certainly not for a small or a junior mining company to have this sort of working arrangement. And I think it came together because there's a real alignment in a sense of this national mission. They can see the pathway that we see to make a real impact on Australia. And from our side, we have this opportunity now to reshore and expedite required test work at Mount Peak, as well as at Speewah, and ultimately to work with the most prestigious organisation in Australia when it comes to scientific research, and to build teamwork and workflows which will really expedite and differentiate the company. And we're really excited about this agreement, and we're looking forward to progressing into a really mutually beneficial partnership in the months ahead, but the years ahead as well. So this is a really important outcome today. I was really, really pleased to be able to close out the agreement last night. I want to send my thanks to the people involved at Cyro, and also to let them know that, you know, we understand as a board the sensitivities of the agreement that we've made, and that we'll be representing our side of the partnership with due care, and appreciation as well. And that we're really excited to collaborate on a going forward basis. So I won't get into all the technicals here, but the main things that shareholders should be aware of is that the hybridized flow sheet that we'll be working for in terms of Tivan Plus will involve, we think, a really significant reduction in CapEx, just from a technology point of view. It will involve reshoring of capability, which I'm sure the Australian government is going to be delighted to know. It will involve an intermediate staging point, which is really important, where we may not have to build the titanium pigment plant until we're good and ready. We'll be able to basically have a feedstock which can go into a sulfate plant, and that itself will reduce CapEx by a step function and enable us to get in the vanadium game even sooner. And so that was a key aspect that was not available in the Tivan process as such. So there's various other aspects that we're excited about in terms of environmental impacts and so forth, but it is the collaboration of the teams that I was most fascinated by and drawn to, because the people that we've got in our company and the talent and depth of experience at CSIRO, putting that together and watching that magic happen, I think that really great things will come out of this. And I'm really, really proud to have been involved in an agreement which is, potentially path-breaking, where industry and research are working together so constructively. So out of those 4 findings yields some critical paths. And again, in the spirit of accountability and transparency, we've put this diagram together. It's relatively simple, but again, a lot of people are going to be new to this. And what we're doing is so differentiated that we want these sort of infographics to assist in people comprehending the story. So the very brief story is that we've got 2 resources now that we own, Mount Peak and Speewah. Speewah is the primary resource that we're interested in because of the higher vanadium grade, proximity to port, larger resource, and so forth. Mount Peak has a key role to play in the pilot plant, which I'll come to in a second, because we can access 100 tons of ore or so that we need to kick off a pilot plant faster than we can at Speewah. It'll probably save us about 6 months on the critical path as defined. And that's obviously important. And we want to move as fast as possible, as we've shown in the past 4 months. Now, beyond that is our other titanium resources that we may be interested in, vendiferous and titanium, I should say, whether they're in Australia or globally. And we believe if the technology pathway holds up on its current trajectory, that this will put the company in a genuinely differentiated position where we're able to produce vanadium at massive scale and be protected by various intellectual property rights around the world, enter into various licensing agreements, and have a global impact as well, which is important. If we can financialize the vanadium sector to the degree that I think is now possible, it can become a highly, highly relevant pathway for many countries in terms of addressing climate change. And it's that sort of ambition, I think, which drove CSIRO in terms of the expedited agreement that we managed to reach. And so when we look at the critical paths, note that everything goes through the pilot. The pilot will be in Darwin. We've already done about 2 months' work in terms of facilitating that. That's in terms of particularly the NT government, various arms of that, but also in terms of being able to access the ore samples that will be required. And there's a bunch of other facilitatory steps which are in the announcement today. If you have a look at that, you'll see that we're already well down this track. From the pilot, we go to Middle Arm and we build the Tivan processing facility, which will be the landmark project at Middle Arm on the critical path for us and the timelines that we've announced today. And that can yield multiple products. And these will all be under consideration until they're not. But note that the lines that we've defined with hard copy there are the ones that we're obviously most focused on, which is vanadium pentoxide and the sulfate plant feedstock. Those are the 2 that will drive the project economics that will be defined in the upcoming period. And finally, just note that we've included pathways, and the most important pathway overall for the mission and ultimately for the cap raises and so forth, not so much that, but the project finance too, all runs through VRFB. So we have to be animated in supporting that development of that sector. It doesn't mean we're going to go vertical ourselves and start doing all this electrolyte, but it does mean we can bring in A-list partners to that space. And again, through that sort of association, highly differentiate the pathway that this company is on. A brief revenue model comparison. This is Mount Peak versus Speewah. We've deliberately left out a volume of throughput for Speewah because it's under consideration and because the ASX gets quite jumpy if you want to publish volumes of throughputs. But you can see clearly, independent of throughput, that the composition per commodity changes dramatically as we head towards Speewah, such that the vanadium share is around 50%. As opposed to 28% at Mount Peak. And that's the higher vanadium and concentrate grade kicking in. Now, those shares will be accentuated even further in the event that we do the titanium feedstock, because the revenue will be lower, the capex will be materially lower, and it'll mean that the vanadium as a percentage share of the whole project goes up even further. So these sorts of considerations are germane, and we're focused on that. And we wanted to communicate this point, at least, that the revenue share has shifted, and that will inform as well decisions about secondary, tertiary resources down the track, I'm sure. Okay, so to timelines, and if there has been, I would say a persistent criticism of this company, or TNG, I should say, over the past decade, it's been slippage on timelines. Again, I'm not going to get back into the history of everything that happened. It's all forward focus now. From our side, and this is the board, myself, Anthony, Simon, and now Christine Charles, who's joined us just last week, really important addition to the board in terms of our skill matrix, stature, networks, and so forth. But it was very clear to the board that we wanted to provide credible timelines to market, and timelines which go beyond, traditional funnels and stage gates and so forth. This is us communicating the pathway to project delivery, which runs through the pilot, which is why it's on the same chart. And the pilot itself having various KPIs, which the market will be able to assess and monitor as we progress, and conjoining these two projects, at the appropriate point in time. And so I've already seen some stuff. I had to work through some of the online feedback for the prior session, and I can understand the frustrations in watching suboptimal AV and so forth. But I can already see, some comments about, this is not going to move the needle and so on and so forth. There's a very short-term philosophy, I think, in some of the online forums, and it's natural, particularly for a company that's been through a journey like this. It should be clear to everyone, patently clear, that no one could have moved faster than I have in the past 4 months, not just to identify the problems, but to execute solutions. There are some aspects to project delivery which you cannot change. There are laws of physics and there are laws of the land. And to build a project of this significance, this is a credible timeline. And it's important that we hold out a credible timeline, not just to shareholders, but to stakeholders and to government, because that enables them to engage proactively with us. And it's also important for the new investors that will now come into the company to have a sense of the mission. And I've said this before, but let me say this again. I do feel sympathy. I really do, for some of the long-standing shareholders of this company. All I can do in the position that I came in is, again, identify the problems, come up with lateral solutions, execute them at rapid speed, redefine the mission, bring new investors in to forward that mission, and ultimately create a value proposition which is so exciting and so profoundly different than any other critical mineral resource company in Australia, frankly, that it will create that enthusiasm for new money, but also, I hope, build trust and confidence with the long-suffering shareholders that they should stay the course. Now, that's ultimately their decision. I totally respect that. But the rate of change of this company is so dramatic, I would say. And these timelines are important to put out there because they're credible. You are not going to hear from this board, we're going to be reaching FID in a year and then rolling that forward another year and so forth. We believe these timelines will hold up, and we actually think they have two-way risk. Well, certainly I do. And that's because I do operate at the speed that I've shown in the past 4 months. And I'm able to parlay outcomes into other outcomes. And everything that I do operates in parallel. So this is our view as a board of the timelines that are required. But I'd emphasize there are two-way risks to it. Could be sooner, could be later. But so two-way risks, and a path where the market as well as shareholders can monitor key performance through the delivery of a pilot plant over the next 6, 12, 18 months, and so on and so forth. Ongoing news flow, lots of other things which can catalyze value creation for shareholders. In terms of the pilot plan itself, it's absolutely necessary. And I just want to emphasize that for any novel mining technology, it's a requirement. It's not negotiable. You're not going to raise the sorts of money that is required with a technology that's only been proven in labs until you pilot it properly. And the great thing about a pilot is that it creates NPV pretty much automatically for a project and for a company, because what you're doing is you're taking out the risk of a cataclysmic failure where you've raised large sums of money and the technology ultimately has some form of fatal flaw. And the mining industry is littered with examples of this. And there's recognition now that pilots have an absolute pivotal role to play: social license, regulatory optimization, project finance, also just destigmatizing sometimes the technology so that it's not as scary, particularly if you're putting it near an urban area, as we'll be doing with this in Darwin. So it's really, really important, but it more than pays for itself in terms of NPV, because you're taking out those probabilistic weighted cash flows that you could have a cataclysmic failure. And instead, you're paying away some money to the top side, but you're deferring costs and benefits as well. So this chart's a bit academic. It's a bit geeky. If you're into this sort of stuff, you can look through the links that are provided. There's a really good academic paper in this area, which is referenced there. And I encourage you to think in those terms, because again, not only is it necessary, but it creates a lot of value if and when you can get it up. Now, sometimes pilots struggle because they don't generate organic cash flow, right? Now, our pilot plant won't do that initially because we'll be proving up Mount Peak and Speewah specifically, but it can be licensed, it can be multi-ore. It's not so specific as some rare earths, for example. So I can imagine this as an ongoing R&D project, which ultimately could well create revenue opportunities as well. And we've made this case really strongly publicly. If you have a look at the CMO submission that we wrote back in January, highly focused on R&D, highly focused on pilot plant funding. I can confirm, as we did earlier today in the note, that Tivan applied for a development grant from the federal government in the February round. We made an 80-page submission to that in terms of our own pilot plant plans. Now, that development grant is extremely contested and crowded, I'm told, but we've also made a broader case to the government that the sleeve for that funding should be much greater than the $50 million that's available. And I think that that argument has made a really serious impact in Canberra. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's in the federal budget in May in terms of the federal government recognising the importance of R&D and recognising pilot plants as an area of market failure, which is where government intervention is required to assist. And so I'm very much in favour of pilots across the whole critical minerals space. Tivan's made its own case to government publicly for these sorts of initiatives. Our initiative is very strongly supported by the NT government. The NT government wrote a letter to Canberra on our behalf, and we'll see where it goes. But we're confident that there's multiple ways to fund this, and we're looking forward to advancing this as soon as possible. In terms of environmental improvements, I won't slow down this presentation, but I need to emphasize that one of the most important aspects that Middle Arm facilitates is an approval process which is holistic. And so the proponent for what's known as the strategic environmental assessment will actually be DIPL. So it's the NT government effectively applying on behalf of proponents. And we're part of these conversations. We're part of the data exchanges. We're part of, the real bleeding edge now of Middle Arm. We are the most advanced proponent at Middle Arm and the only public one. So we're having an ability to influence, I would say, aspects of the common use infrastructure in terms of its design, but ultimately building great relationships as well with government and specifically with the EPA. And that relationship was totally fractured, as everyone knows. The EPA has been wonderful. We've done multiple sessions all the way up and with the operational team as well. And it's a fantastic working relationship we've got. And we'll be working our way through various processes with our local environmental consultant in Darwin now and deciding when is the opportune time for Tivan to join the SEA. There are some lower probability scenarios where we stay outside of it deliberately, But I'd say my essential expectation is for the company to join at the appropriate time and for us to fall within that umbrella and for us to be able to take advantage of all the work that's being done by DIPL. So we're really pleased about Middle Arm, and the process is streamlined. It's well designed. We're very much involved with the master planning team. They've done a fantastic job. And when I think the level of engineering and sophistication becomes more public in Darwin, I'm confident that the community will get behind the precinct, and certainly our project. I mean, our project is perfectly designed for Darwin in terms of its forward-facing mission, creating a lot of jobs, sustainability, tie up with Sun Cable we've mentioned before. So these are really important initiatives. It's very easy for the government to embrace what we're doing, and for community too as well. And when I showed the slide, above about Middle Arm as well, I neglected to mention that on the central path for us, we actually expect to bring the concentrate to East Arm, the existing deep water port in Darwin, and then shunt it around to the back of Middle Arm where we are. And that will avoid us being involved in a lot of the marine disturbance as well. And so Tivan is uniquely well positioned within the Middle Arm precinct to build a flagship project for Darwin. And it's really exciting. And I feel really encouraged by the regulatory engagement that we've had on the environmental side already. Speewah is a journey, but it's not a journey we're starting from scratch, not by any stretch. APM, who's worked with the company for a long time, has also done a lot of the preparatory work that's required at Speewah. We've got, I think it's a 150-page report that was written several years ago, which we've dusted off, picked up, and which we're running with. And that's important in terms of knowing exactly not just the processes, which are shown here, but the steps required to expedite the various approvals. I've spent some time already in Broome, Kununurra, Wyndham, working with local stakeholders, First Nations specifically, and we're working to expedited timeframes, but also with great engagement and sensitivities. And some of what we've been working on there will be revealed, I hope, in the next month. And so this is a very traditional type flow sheet. We're very confident that it will converge at the right time, and we'll have to work our way through, of course. But there's a commonality here in terms of overall philosophies. And there's I think a real recognition as well that the project we're looking to define can finally unlock the corridor that exists across north of Australia, which has never really been able to be defined on a sustainable economic basis. And for that reason, when we have conversations, with NAIF, for example, they're really excited about what we're proposing. And there's various other stakeholders I could mention as well. But the ability to do something of our scale as between Kununurra, Wyndham and Darwin is really unique, and it will help us ultimately facilitate the environmental side as well. In terms of the broader picture, I won't get too slowed down by this slide. It is necessary for any company that has true ambitions in this space and at our scale to define their own net pathway, their net zero pathway. And we've started that process. We'll do it more formally at the appropriate time. But conceptually, you can think of the company having an emissions profile which graduates down as we add solar in particular and move out of the construction phase to a point where you reach a baseline level of emissions, which can be offset through different means. All the while, though, the core mission of Tivan will be to reduce global emissions in Australia. And when you're reducing emissions through technologies that you're deploying, these are referred to as scope 4 emissions. Now, carbon accounting gets a bit wonky in that area. There's some links provided, but it is to say that we can differentiate ourselves very, very clearly. And I think ultimately win the backing of a really, really broad audience. In fact, we try to rally the country around a project like this because it is that differentiated. It's not going to be sufficient, in my view, for the environmentalists merely not to oppose Tivan. I want them to vocally support what we're proposing because we're part of the solution. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it's attainable, certainly with the relationships that I've got and certainly with the media connections I've got. And I'm going to be putting pressure on them to see where that lands. And it's these sorts of moves which other companies cannot make and which can ultimately yield very important outcomes for our company. So for decarbonisation, we'll tighten this up. I want to have the conversations with the right stakeholders here to see if we can do more. but the baseline pathway ultimately involves an incredibly low amount of emissions per number of jobs. And that is a key and very salient message to bring to community, to bring to government. And I'm confident that that will hold up. So there'll be more definition here, but again, a very important early stage initiative of the company. In terms of First Nations, less is more sometimes, but I do hope to be in a position to start talking about this more publicly in the next month. You'll see a very differentiated path, and it's important for us because we're operating in remote jurisdictions with high levels of First Nations populations and in areas which have been neglected in many ways by the country. And so we've got to be incredibly engaged, very sensitive, incredibly inclusive. I think inclusion is really the right word, genuine inclusion. And you'll see steps in this direction through mid-year, but before then as well, I think. So I've met Kimberley Land Council in person, Central Land Council, obviously. In the north, it's mainly Larrakia. Larrakia is very important, very influential traditional owner group in Darwin. And we're working on business terms with all these groups now. And they're really excited, I think, by having such a dramatic change in managerial style, can I say? But also, I feel as though, by going there and listening and going there with great respect, and frankly, with my origin story as well in Alice Springs, and with work that I've done in First Nations around the country in the last couple of years, there's a genuine mutual respect, and they see an opportunity, as we do, to engage in new ways, and that can only lead to good things. And so I'll say more about this important area at the right time, but please know that it is central to the mission of Tivan to open up very genuine, inclusive pathways for mutual benefit. This leads to the bigger picture, and again, I won't dwell here, but I've been talking extensively now about consolidating efforts. And again, this is really part of the central mission from here, which is to combine efforts of government, as you've seen. We've now entered into agreements with NC government, with CSIRO, that's government and that's industry and that's research and community as well. We've spoken publicly about the national interest, and I do think, for better or for worse, this is the way critical minerals are heading on a global basis. So this bifurcation as between the West, the Western Buyers Club, and areas of influence with China. And we need to be thinking about that strategically, upstream and downstream. And we need to be thinking about national interest, and we can define it in those terms. And what we're defining here at Tivan is firmly in Australia's national interests, much more so than any other critical mineral project that's anywhere close to delivery. Tivan is unique, absolutely unique in that sense. And I hope that message gets through very clearly. There are some resources there for people that are new to this story. And again, I just make reference to the critical minerals strategy submission that we made back on the 1st of February. It's turning into be what I hoped, which is a really, really important document, widely read, widely recirculated, real shelf value and legacy value. I think it will ultimately inform how the entire sector takes shape in Australia. So this is the hardest problem, and this is that Australia was late in recognizing the importance of climate transition and lost a decade with the climate wars in Canberra. We now have a legislated target for net zero. That means the country has a law which says we're going to net zero 2050. We have no plan. We really don't. Anyone that's involved in this will tell you that the stretch targets are not achievable, even though it's law. So anyone that comes up with credible, scalable solutions is going to get a very, very significant audience. Not a small solution, not a company that's going to build, a bathtub of vanadium. It's not relevant. You need to build the whole swimming pool, the whole ocean, in fact, the whole ocean, to drive the price to a point where batteries are competitive and where there's security of supply to provoke the R&D cycle, which is necessary. Now, we're up against pumped hydro, and people who are following me now on Twitter will see that I've had a little bit of a pop there, and rightly so. Not to, undermine or in any way denigrate the attempts. Okay, it's just to say that it's an extremely difficult project that got politicized. And here we are now with a drill stuck 150 meters from Cooma, and real concerns about the ability of pumped hydro to act as battery storage in scale. So that is shown in the right charts. This is from CSIRO's grid storage roadmap. really great document. And it shows that the committed storage in the next couple of years is really all pumped hydro, and that there's a vast gap for new storage. Now you extrapolate this to 2050, it's dramatic, absolutely dramatic. And people want to talk about lithium batteries and various other forms of chemistries. All those chemistries run through China, all of them. That's why the price point's lower. And so Australia will face a decision: come in our direction with a local supply chain, or head in the direction of these other battery chemistries, but run a critical dependency, grid storage, through China. Now, I'm thinking they're not going to do that. And I was involved, when decisions were made around keeping Huawei out of 5G. And I'd be really, really doubtful that Australia is going to build critical dependency on grid storage batteries in China. Again, think about what that implies. Everything that's going on in critical minerals right now is the government politely suggesting, please don't export to China. And the idea is that we're going to import all of that to build grid storage. I don't think so. So national sovereignty, supply chains, these sorts of concepts matter. They play firmly to us. And the scale of the problem that Australia has in confronting net zero legislated target, once again, is so significant that if you can define a company that's solving that problem, you are going to create enormous value. These other companies, they're not trying to solve a problem. They're just trying to sell commodities, right? And they're not even going to do that, frankly. If we can solve a really hard problem, we will be in business, and we'll be in business for a very, very long time. So that's the conception. That's why it's so important. And all these numbers will back that up. In terms of where VRB is at, it's not where it needs to be. Let's be clear. And part of our job now is to stimulate that. And you'll see, I think, Tivan really start to lean in, not in terms of doing what other companies do, is suddenly go vertical or suddenly start talking about other things. No, we want to be a thought leader, and we want to do our job, which is to secure and ultimately supply vanadium at scale, and to financialize and commoditize the supply. That would do it. That's what we need. And we're able to do that with the foundations that we've got in place. In terms of moving the vanadium redox flow sector to the right here, yeah, that will require other people, but there's no doubting the demand for it. Absolutely no doubting. There's so much affection for VRFB, and the inventor, Maria, who we now know, and who's almost national treasure. She's an amazing woman. And, we've been talking extensively with her about the journey that her technology has been on for the past 30 years. And there's a frustration, not just with her, but with everyone, that it's sort of withering on the vine. And the common point is that if we could only just find a large-scale Western stable price supply of vanadium, then off we go. Now, I think we'll need a Japanese partner in the middle. There are some patents floating around now in different aspects of membrane technology and so forth. But these are discussions that are underway, and there's no shortage of people that are going to stick their hands up if we can bring the vanadium out of those hills in the Kimberley. Okay, so we can push this arrow to the right. That's part of the mission now. And again, I would raise serious questions about the two most advanced technologies. You're going to hear all sorts of other battery chemistries, but all of them will suffer the same issue, which is lack of scale and dependency upon other countries. So we have a real advantage here, and it's up to us to realize that. And this is, the price point. This is what I've mentioned. And how do you get that price point down? There's two ways. One is you actually lower the price, and you can do that if you're market dominant and you've created a financial platform to do that. And you have that sort of economies of scale, which we're proposing through multiple projects. That is achievable for sure. And the second is through R&D. One of the reasons that these other technologies have moved along, particularly the lithium ion sector, is because billions and billions of dollars worldwide has supported a genuine R&D cycle, which has improved cost to storage ratios. And again, VRFB has just been left alone in that sense because, the underlying supply of the commodity has not been available. But if it is, then more research can go in, technological advance will take place, and the technology curve will bend like everything does, whether it's lithium ion, PV cells, so on and so forth. It's all there. So it's not just price competition. And we don't need to be directly in competition with the other, battery chemistries, in my view, because of the advantages that we will have in terms of security of supply. But it is to say that an R&D cycle is necessary, and it's not Tivan's job to do that. It's Tivan's job to stimulate that and to find absolute A-list partners, I think in Japan, to help us with that. And that will be a project of mine this year, just on this side. So to close up, what I want to leave you with is this real clear sense of government policies and government engagement in this sector. This is as close as it's going to get to large-scale industrial intervention, absent a war in Australia. The government feels as though it's got a remit here to lean into the sector in ways that it does not lean into other sectors in Australia in the name of security. And whilst doing so, acknowledge that critical minerals have this really key facilitatory role to play in addressing climate transition. And it's very important that that's there in some ways, because if government was leaning in this hard to critical minerals, it would sort of look like a precursor to something which you don't want, which is global conflict. And in some ways, it's climate change that unites us and China. And it's important to recognize that. And so we'll see where all these things land, but the nature and scale of the leaning in, shall we say, from federal government, other governments around the world is dramatic. You only need to look at US Infrastructure Bill, Jobs Act, Inflation Reduction Act in the US to understand this is basically the largest post-war intervention, absent a pandemic or two. And it's really designed to facilitate the energy transition, but it's also to lengthen the security supply for the US economy all the way to Australia. And we'll have significant leverage there as well. And if there are other offtake opportunities that we want to really prioritize, it probably will be the US, because we've got a free trade agreement with the US, and that enables us to access the subsidies as if we were a US mining company. And again, those discussions are underway already. For Australia, if you look through the critical minerals discussion paper, you can infer about 10 different priorities which the government is trying to promote. And some companies will be able to promote 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these objectives. Tivan can promote all 10. We are uniquely compatible. In some ways, what we've designed is the enactment of federal government policy, which is, I think, ultimately why we'll be able to push so hard and why we're achieving what we're already achieving. It should be patently obvious, particularly through the CSIRO tie-up, that the way that we've defined the mission of the company is absolutely compatible to not just the national mission, but to contemporaneous government policy. And so you can see in item form on this chart, 10 things. We've scored where we think Tivan lands in terms of Speewah and Midlam project definition, mostly at the outer perimeter. We're really right at the edge of everything the government wants. And that's really important. And you can see as well that, even if you look right across different sectors in Australia, we'll be breaking new ground in areas such as renewables, circularity, First Nations, pushing the diversity angles as far as we can as well. And all of this will facilitate the company in many ways, whether it's project financing, pilot plants, social license, and so on and so forth. This is sort of the new era in critical minerals and mining in general. Gone are the days where you can show up, with a PowerPoint presentation, a BFS and expect to raise money. It's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen. The government's got a much more broader agenda when they're leaning in. They want to also create social and community-based change, particularly in remote regions. And that's really where we come in. So I need people to understand that. I think it's hard to get this across to retail. One of the reasons I wanted to re-record this call was because I think people misunderstand already what we're doing, what's already been achieved and the direction we're heading in. And it's in lockstep where the country is going. We're leading the way here. So please, I would say, go light on the peer comparisons. This is a singular story now. And if we prosecute it well, the upside vision is unbounded, I would say. Very hard to put a cap on this from here. You cannot say the company is worth 1 billion, 2 billion as a maximum outcome, which is already much greater than most of the other companies that are floating around. We're talking about industrialization pathway here, which could endure for decades, and very hard to handicap that. So I wanted to end on that note in terms of the substantive parts of the presentation, just to really reinforce the nature of the change that the board has pursued and has empowered me to execute, which I'm very, very grateful for. But also to reinforce that, in some ways, what we're looking to do here is bigger than the company even, and we'll get brought through, with all those tailwinds, I think, that are available to us. So in terms of wrapping this up, there's just some data points, again, particularly relevant for people that are relatively new to the story. Strategic partners now named as Cyro and Sun Cable. And what two better ways to start? There'll be others. And it's going to be fascinating to see who else leans in and who else we want to bring in. I noted some comments and questions about SMS Group. SMS Group's very important still. We've been in discussions pretty much continually for 4 months. Obviously, they've worked extensively on Tivan, the technology. The relationship's in good shape, and we're very forward focused. Okay, we need to be. They're a great group, great standing internationally. They've done a lot of work in vanadium electrolyte as well, so that could be a natural point of commonality. We have been discussing a project facilitation agreement. The point I want to emphasize here is that they're in competition. They're in competition. Competitive tension is very important to how I operate. Everyone's in competition with everyone. Pressure gets exerted in all directions at the same time, in all dynamics. And so SMS is a great counterparty. We value their relationship, and we're looking for ways to re-engage with them. And if the right opportunity arises, then we will, in a more holistic manner. There's a bunch of other changes there. You can see that. And this list will continue to evolve at rapid speed. There's no shortage of people looking to lean in. All the serious people in the country understand what we're doing and are really animated by their support. And I think we've taken people's breath away in terms of what we've already done. And this will continue to yield results in this partner sort of scorecard, if you will, or table. And I think by the end of the year, it's going to be quite something to see who we're affiliated with. The board, and again, shout out to Anthony, just a great source of support and wisdom. He's a tough guy. It's good, particularly when you're moving as fast as I am and as we needed to. We walked into what we walked into, and we had to make really, really tough decisions, including in terms of whether to ultimately end the company. And Anthony's judgment and discretion and demeanor has been really important to me. He's highly independent of me. We didn't know each other, up until the change of campaign. And I really value his presence on the board. I know he's really committed to the mission, which is great as well. And so, yeah, real shout out and thanks to Anthony for being there through this period. It was really important that he was and that he is. Christine's joined us, and great addition to the board with her tonight in Darwin at the networking event. So, things are really taking shape there. Great pedigree, standing, great wisdom, has seen it all, and really excited. She can see so clearly what we're doing. And she was really animated about joining us. There were others as well that we could have gone with, but Christine stood out for various reasons, and we're delighted that she's part of the team. And a shout out to Simon as well, who's really helped in terms of what we expected, which is transitioning the company from the old era to the new era. And he's been very important in that process. I'm grateful for that. The team I mentioned extensively at the general meeting in January, so I won't go through that again. A shout out to Helen Yang, though. She's come and landed in Darwin today, a journey back from her. I think she's going to make a real impact in Darwin. Really excited to see how that plays out. Project team I've mentioned as well, new addition there with Alex, and it's onwards and upwards here. The team will grow. It has to, because we've got a big journey ahead. But the mood and the spirit and the way that the team has embraced the change and the determination and the amount of work that we've got through, it's been fantastic. I meant what I said, back in one of the presentations, that people work with me, not for me. And that's the way it's gone. It's been great collaboration, real open architecture of information sharing, and a journey. And the team's excited to see where this goes, and are really grateful for their support and proud to be leading them. Corporate overview, quick shout out to King River Resources there on the register now. And finally, what's next? Okay, so we've got some events. Diamond Dog I've mentioned a few times. We are moving offices in Perth. Leases up, we're extending, we'll still be out in Subiaco. More details on that soon. I am going to introduce Tivan to the global hedge fund community. Watch out. It's a big session next week. we'll basically take this presentation, knock it into size, and we will be globally known with the community that I've been involved with for 15 years, the absolute top draw group of investors around the world. So that'll be fascinating. We'll be talking about critical minerals in general and various other national security strategic issues. But the fact that we've been on this journey, or I've been on this journey, is it provides them with a unique vantage point as well in terms of Australia, but then specifically Tivan too. So great opportunity to brand and to broaden the story to a network which no one else has. And so it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. Really looking forward to that session with Jens and the team in New York. We are going to have some events in Darwin in May. We're making a big impact here. You'll see ongoing media. You'll see me more aggressive now on Twitter. I said I would be. I said the story had to get out there. We're going to be using social media. It's important. And Twitter is actually a great tool in terms of a direct contact with highly engaged shareholders, me being able to show the progress we're making in a more direct method. And we'll have a second version of the website up, and you'll see all of the skills and talents and efforts that we're putting into pitch decks, for example, landing on the websites, lots of interactive things. It just took more time to build. And obviously we wanted to get the pieces in place, which we do have now. The foundational stones are there. And so all these other things will be happening. We do expect to move in the direction of a technical advisory group where we can bring in key people, key expertise to help the board form judgments. Will be a capital raise. I expect Q2. There will be a cap on the number of shares that we can sell, because we've sold 100 million shares to KRR as part of the Speewah acquisition. Nothing to be concerned about here. I think there's a wall of money waiting for us. Okay, so please make decisions based upon your own judgment, your own risk appetite, but what's ahead? What's ahead, not what's in the past. There is a genuinely exciting, differentiated story that's unfolding here. You can see all evidence of that, and I will keep you posted on Twitter through announcements and through transparency and accountability, which has not been provided in the correct way at this company in the past. But even in the sector, we'll continue to do things very differently at rapid speed and with high impact. And so to close, I just want to emphasize that those three characteristics and principles, which I held out during the campaign as part of my journey, my career, are very much part of the DNA now of this company and will be instrumental. Hard work, integrity, and resilience. Resilience means coming back from setbacks, like I had with the AV fail earlier today. And here I am posting this hour late at night now in Darwin. I hope it's well received. I hope shareholders understand how committed we are to the mission. And I hope shareholders can see the optimism that we have here now as well. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much. Good night.